Hello, my name is Jerome Edwin Cohen, or most people call me Jerry Cohen, and I was born in Omaha, Nebraska on February 20th, 1929. That's more than a century ago, according to my calculations. And we were all born in that hospital on 36th and Cumming Street, was it? What was the name of that hospital? It's now turned into an old people's home or something. Methodist Hospital, Nebraska Methodist Hospital. And that's where I was born. And my parents were David R. Cohen and Hannah G. Cohen. And an older sister was Cecile Louise Cohen. And now I'm going to stop talking and start answering questions.
Jerry, tell me about your mother and dad.
Okay, my mother and dad were David Cohen, David R. Cohen, and Hannah G. Cohen. Hannah G. Cohen was standing for Hannah Greenblatt Cohen, and David R. Cohen, and he was also known as Dr. David R. Cohen, an optometrist. That was for a while, but he also was an insurance salesman and had a interesting business in the roaring 20s, selling costume jewelry at Nadelson's and the other Jewish department store in downtown Omaha. There was no suburbs. Downtown Omaha was it. And they lived there, and you want me to keep going about? Okay. I was born on February 20th, 1929. My father had this business of selling costume jewelry in the roaring 20s, and everybody was wealthy on paper. And he made a lot of money on paper. And so then and we lived in Minnelusa. I don't remember anything about it, but saw the house later. But when I was, 5 months old, on the 4th of July, we moved to 301 South 50th Avenue, right on the corner of 50th Avenue and Farnham Street, in a nice house. And that was because he was making money on the 4th of July. Then in the fall, he lost every penny, like everybody else did in the Great Depression. The first thing people stopped buying was costume jewelry. So there we were on 50th Avenue in Farnham, and his business had gone in the toilet, so to speak. And through the years, we survived. I can remember one part was, I don't know why this is popping into my brain, but there was an oil burner in the house, and it was a gravity oil burner. That meant there was an oil tank, and the gravity fed the oil down into a furnace where you lit it with a flame, and that heated the house. And he had no money. So there was a company called, I think Gendler was the name, and they were so nice. Why I'm thinking of this. They said, "Okay, Dave, that's okay. You'll pay me when you can, but I can't let you family freeze to death." So he started selling life insurance to friends, made a little money selling life insurance, and then he became an optometrist. At that time, you didn't have to go to college at all to become an optometrist. You had to work with an optometrist and learn from the optometrist you worked for, and then you had to pass a test. And then you got a certificate from the state of Nebraska that you were a licensed optometrist. So he did that, and he started a company called State Optical Company. It was right next door to the State Theater down on 14th and Douglas, I think it was, or Farnham, right next to the State Theater. You remember those old days? Okay, well, there was right next to them was then. For some reason, that didn't work out too well, so he moved into Zales Jewelry Store on 15th and Farnham Street, and had an optical department in Zales, and worked made a brief living as an optometrist in those days, and then my mother became the secretary to the rabbi at Bethel, I think it was. And so we grew up in Omaha on 50th and Farnham Street, and that's it, and goodbye.
Tell me, was your mother and dad born in Omaha?
No, my father was born in Providence, Rhode Island, born in the United States of America. My mother moved from Europe somewhere, sometime, into Canada with several others. And she had a sister named Lillian Brown, maid to Dave Brown, who was a court reporter. And then there was another sister named Tilly, who was married to somebody named Jacobs. And that was, there was a Joe Jacobs. There were two Joe Jacobs in town. One was indoor Joe Jacobs and one was outdoor Joe Jacobs. One worked for the General Outdoor Advertising Company and so on. So there were the three sisters that came here, Lillian and Tilly and Hannah, and they all had moved down from Canada. And that's that. And my sister and I grew up on 50th and Farnham, walked Dundee School every day, and in those days, of course, you carried the girls' books for them. There was no one in the world had a thing called a backpack. I drove by a school not too long ago, and a whole swarm of kids came out. Every single solitary kid was wearing a backpack full of books. They didn't have backpacks, but of course, you had to do it. I used to stop by Joanne Robinson's house on 51st Street. I think she married, what's his name, one of the Rips boys. And yeah, I remember the Rips family that had an optical manufacturing company. I used to schlep prescriptions down there and wait while they ground the lenses on them. And what's her name? Was it Esther Rips? And she was always covered with red rouge, which is what you use to grind optical lenses with. Nowadays, everything's on a computer. They push a button and the lens comes out. So that was talking about my parents.
Well, did your father have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, Sam Cohen, who was with Hinky Dinky, and Herman Cohen, who had a store in the Medical Arts Building. He had a cigar store or something, Herman Cohen. And during World War I, he went over with the famous general that landed on D-Day or something. Yeah, I remember the Medical Arts Building. Every doctor in town was in the Medical Arts Building. There weren't any suburbs. No one who lived past 50th Street. 50th and Dodge Street, like 72nd and Dodge Street was, I think, the city limits. And 50th and Dodge Street was a drugstore. I forgot what it was, a Gould's drugstore or something like that. And the Temple was on 39th or near Leavenworth Street. And then later on, when I got married, we moved into a duplex right across the street from the Temple on 4905 Farnham Street. And that's it. Next question.
Tell me a little bit about your sister.
My sister was married to Ed Milder, and she was very interested in art. And she did painting, and she actually got a degree in art history, and forgot where, at some school. And she taught art at a college on South 72nd Street, somewhere past Center Street. I don't know the name of the college in there. Somebody will remember that. And she taught art history, and she made friends with artists, and someday I'll tell this guy named Ben, I'll show him pictures that she had made and sold and made some money doing artwork. And then my sister and her husband And the kids they had moved to California, and that was that story.
Do you know the names of those kids? Your
Sure.
sister's kids?
My sister's kids? Yeah, the first one, the oldest one is Bob. His real name was H. Robert Wilder. And, okay, now you made me think of it. In 1946, I went to University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. And my sister was married, and all of a sudden, baby was due, and I was a freshman. I was a freshman at a ZBT. What do you call it? Freshman. Wasn't an active member yet. But all the older, my sister's 3 years older, and all the seniors there, I was a freshman, they all knew my gorgeous sister. And so all of a sudden she had a baby, and we were in trouble at the fraternity house for doing something bad. And we were restricted. And all of a sudden my sister had this baby boy named Bob, and she said, we wanted to go to Omaha to see it. Your restrictions are dismissed because you're now an uncle. And go to see the son of one of our famous girlfriends, Cece. And so we did. So I remember his birthday was February of 1947. And then I finally graduated Nebraska in 1950. And my sister still lived in Omaha at the time. And then, lo and behold, I met a girl named Barbara Rothman, and we fell in love, and we got married. And her name is, everybody called her Tootsie. And okay, now, I'm off the beaten path.
Let's go back and talk about your sister's other children.
Okay, there was Bob, Bobby, and then Danny, and then Gigi, Gabrielle, but Gabrielle G, so you went by Gigi, and then the youngest one, Steve Milder, who, when he was in California and grew up to be, he was the youngest one, but he had passed away. No reason known, just whatever it was. He had a heart condition and passed away. He was never married. The other kids were married and so on, and still are. And H. Robert, Bob, did very well as some sort of computer technical engineer, worked for a company, and got to do traveling to Europe for them, and did very well. And still, now he's retired, but he still goes to Greece every summer for a month or so. And Danny lives in Culver City, California, and has two daughters that are doing well. One's in Washington, D.C. doing something, and one in New York. So they're doing very well. And Gigi lives in the suburb of Aspen, Colorado, and she has two children, and her husband sells tea, T-E-A, very fancy kind of tea, and does all right. So everybody's doing okay.
Let's go back and tell me, did your mother, how did she meet your father?
How did she, meet him?
Yes.
I wasn't there, I don't know.
You don't know.
But,
What brought her to Omaha?
well, they all came as sisters. Lillian and Tilly and Hannah got to Omaha, and why, I can't answer. I don't know why they came from Canada to here. Maybe one of them came and, I don't know, there was a mother of theirs. The mother of theirs was married and then remarried, and maybe I think their mother moved here for some reason that was important to the mother. And so they moved here to be with their mother, grandma, whatever, I forgot.
Were any of your grandparents living when you were growing up?
Just my mother's mother. That was the only grandparent, yes. And she was married to her second husband, and they lived right by Jocelyn Castle, that square block right down the hill, one block. This would be about 38th or 39th or something like that, and lived there. And we used to get to go over there every once in a while. But my memory of that is faded.
Where did you start elementary school, Jerry?
When?
Where?
Dundee, because we lived on 50th Avenue in Farnham. We walked to school every day.
And then high school?
Omaha Central High School. Now that was sort of interesting because I graduated high school in 1946. So let's go back the 7 years before that. World War II. December 7th, 1941. And the war was there. And remember Pearl Harbor? And so we walked to school every day and graduated. Now here's one that young people won't understand at all. Midterm. Born in February. Started grade school in midterm, late January or January sometime. Went there for 7, 8 years, whatever it is, and graduated Dundee School midterm. Started Central High School midterm. And their midterm class was pretty darn small. Central High School, then in midterm, the war was going on. And instead of having to have 32 hours credit to graduate, you only needed to have 30. So I and a few other my classmates said, this is crazy, let's get off of this midterm thing and go 3.5 years or 4.5 years. I was pretty friendly with all of the guys that started the fall after me. And I said, well, I'll do that. No, I better go 3.5 years because I don't want to go into the war zone without a high school graduation. So I graduated in 3.5 years. So I graduated in the spring, early summer, whatever it was, of 1946. And then all of a sudden the war ends, and I go to the University of Nebraska in the fall of 1947, or 46, the fall of 1946. And what happened there? There were hundreds of GIs starting college on the GI Bill. They were all released. Some of them had been tons of them had been in it was the largest entry year at the time ever by double because of all those veterans that came back in 1946. But I was there, and I was the youngest one because I went to high school in 3.5 years. These guys had been overseas fighting. So I was a real youngster there, but I made it through 4 years of college. And then what happened? Then the Korean War came along. Aha. But I'm getting ahead. Go ahead.
I wanted to hear, what did you study at the university?
Business. Didn't have any real plans and so on. But then when I graduated, there was a guy there that I got friendly with named Fadley Farber. His name was A. John Fadley Farber. His father was John A. Farber, and they had an insurance company called the Service Life Insurance Company of Omaha at 1904 Farnham Street. And Fadley talked to his father, and he said, I've got a good friend who just got a degree in business administration. We have a place for him in the insurance company. And they said, sure, bring him here to work. So that was my job. The day after I graduated college, and 2 days later I was at work at the Service Life Insurance Company and worked there and for quite a long time.
What kind of work did you do there?
Okay, I worked it was interesting because I was an underwriter. An underwriter determined the eligibility of an applicant. If you were in the insurance business, you didn't want to quickly issue a policy to someone that was very, very ill, had a long-term chronic illness. So we, that was the job. There was a guy there who was the underwriter. He made those decisions. And this will be interesting if you're really interested. They had a doctor, Robert Long, MD, who worked as a well-known doctor in Omaha, except like many doctors, he took a day off. Wednesdays, he did not work in his office. And every Wednesday morning, he came to the Service Life Insurance Company at 8 o'clock in the morning or about there, and stayed to answer questions and solve problems that we had on certain claim problems or certain applicants that we didn't know if we wanted to insure them, subject to certain other rules. And I got to work pretty closely with Dr. Long. And so I learned a lot of medical terminology. And I could name every bone in the body and all the things about it, and knew that anything that said itis was inflammation of, like tonsillitis, appendicitis, bronchitis, and ectomy was removal of. Anything that ended in ectomy was removal of. And not a lot of people knew that at the time. I suppose it's pretty common knowledge now, but I learned a lot of medical terminology, and it came in very handy when I got into the service. But next question.
What other things did you do at the insurance company?
Well, that was it. That was it. I became technically titled Chief Underwriter. That was a title. And later on, since it was a family-owned thing, and the family made all the money, it was, there was, in those days, there was mutual insurance companies and stock insurance companies. This was a stock insurance company. Made money, went to the stockholders. Mutual insurance companies made money, goes back to the policyholders with dividend or reduced premiums and so on. So they made me a vice president and chief underwriter and gave me 50 shares of stock compared to the farmers that had thousands. But that was pretty good. I got to sign my name on lots of documents at the Service Life Insurance Company.
Did you enjoy that phase of your work experience?
Yeah, right. I had a private office, and I used to have a girl that would come in and take dictation from me, memorandums, why we did this, why we wouldn't do that, why we didn't do the other. And I think I did a good job there. But then what happened? The Korean War came on. And what happened then? The draft was going full blast. Now, should I continue under this? Okay. There were three of us that were good friends, Donald, Van, Richard Goldman, and myself. And we all were about the same age. And we knew that they were drafting like crazy for the Korean War. So we said, well, we're going to get drafted. Let's go down to the draft board and see what we can find out. Three of us went to the draft board. We met this nice lady, and when are we going to get drafted? What's going on? She said, I cannot tell you that. And we kept schmoozing with her, and she said, well, give me your dates of birth. And she went to the file cabinet, and I'll never forget this. It was a big, huge 3-door drawer, large filing cabinet. It gave us her birth dates, and I was in the first top drawer near the back, and the other one was in the drawer right below me, and they were close to me. And she said, well, I'm not going to tell you anything else except we use about we draft and empty about 1/2 a drawer every month. And if you're in the back half of the top drawer, what does that mean? We said, thank you very much. So we found out we were, okay, so then one of the three of us, not me, but I forgot which one, said, here's what we can do. We can join the active Air Force Reserve. And by doing so, we're draft exempt. But then we will get called to active duty, but we'll be called to active duty in the Air Force rather than being drafted into the infantry. And all said, that sounds like a better deal. Well, so we joined the Active Air Force Reserve. That meant we had to go spend one weekend every month, one Saturday, Sunday, out at Offutt Air Force Base and the Active Air Force Reserve. And several months went by, and then bingo, we got called to active duty. Okay? So where did we get sent? The three of us, three nice Jewish boys, to Forbes Air Force Base in Topeka, Kansas. And those boys were both in the garment business, so they put in supplies. And after they interviewed me, they found out that I was strictly administrative, and they made me an office clerk. And luckily, I got into being the clerk of the headquarters company. Clerk in the headquarters company, where the commanding officer worked. And I got to see all the documents, and they said, boy, you're very organized. You get all the mail, and you give it to who it belongs to. Okay, so I did, and I did good there, and all of a sudden something came in. And it was addressed to the commanding officer, but I read everything first, and it said, we are now building up enlisted men faster than we can come up with officers. We need some officers in the following specialties. They read off the name of the specialties, and one of them was hospital administrator. We need hospital administrators desperately bad. And I said, oh, I know a lot of medical terminology. I know administration. I'll become a hospital administrator if they'll have me. So I applied. All three of us applied. And they got turned down. And I got accepted. And a letter came to me. And of course I got two letters of recommendation, one from John A. Farber and one from my guys, whatever he is, second in command. And they both recommended me, and I had an interview and a physical, and all of a sudden a letter came to Corporal Donald Van, Corporal Richard Goldman, and Second Lieutenant Jerome Cohen. They call this like a battlefield commission. And on your personnel file, they always had, what's the source of your commission? And some had ROTC, some had OCS, Officers Candidate School, and so on. Mine said, or the doctors would be DP, direct appointment, CIV, direct appointment from civilian status. Mine said DPMIL, direct appointment from the military. That was a rare thing. And over the next few years, every time a sergeant or somebody would see that, wow, this guy was one of us, and all of a sudden they made him an officer overnight. Anyway, that's that story. Okay, now I'm back to the beginning.
Where did you spend your time?
Okay. The military is sort of interesting. I think my military story is very interesting. Okay, so I'm a hospital administrator, and they sent me to Kentucky, right by Fort Knox, Kentucky. There was a little Air Force, Godman, I think was called, Godman Air Force Base. I was supposed to be a hospital administrator there. And was doing my job there and so on. And then they said, okay, now we have all these hospital administrators. Now we got a lot of hospital administrators. First we didn't have enough, now we got a lot. So we're going to have medics that take care of the battlefield injuries and so on. We need more medics. And we've always had, the medics have always been sergeants, corporals, whatever, staff sergeants, master sergeants. Never had, we're going to make some officers medics, because we think it would be appropriate if a major, a colonel gets wounded, they don't want a sergeant taking care of them, they want another officer taking care of them. So they sent me to Texas, or yeah, it was Texas, for 3 months of first aid battlefield injury training. I gave hundreds of shots to oranges to learn how to give shots, and practiced putting on splints and that sort of stuff, and a lot of medic training. So then we graduated, this whole group, 40 of us. You're going to Korea, 40 of you. Okay? Got 5 days off to go home, say goodbye to your families, come back here in 5 days, and we'll take you to Korea. 40 of us. 40 of us in our room somewhere, I don't know, ready to go over to Korea. And then a guy comes up to the front of the class, fascinating story. He says, I'm going to read 7 names. 7 names that I read remain seated. The rest of you depart through this door. One of the 7 names was Lieutenant Jerome E. Cohen. Okay, here we are. I'm one of the 7. And we didn't know anything, absolutely nothing. They said, well, here's the story. Right now there's a horrible, severe flu epidemic in England, and they're desperate for help. So the 7 of you are going over to England to take care of the flu epidemic. Okay, better than going into the battlefields of Korea. So they put us on a different airplane, sent us to Prestwick, Scotland. We got off the plane, got on a train to go to London, got there. Where do we go from here? They said, well, the flu epidemic is pretty much under control now. This is absolutely true. But we have a place for you. You go to, what was it? Can't remember the name of the base. It was in Woodbridge, Suffolk, Woodbridge RAF base. You go to Woodbridge RAF base in Woodbridge, England, it's right near Ipswich, 60 miles northeast of here, and you will become the medic right there. Hospital administrator, except they didn't have a hospital there, but it was a huge RAF base. And there I spent 11 months and 22 days. And I got injured over there. And they wanted to give me a Purple Heart. And I said, well, this wasn't a battlefield injury. He said, well, you were pitching horseshoes with your friends. And I was bashed up knee, not knee, lower leg. And like, I think the guy was serious, but we talked about it. I said, absolutely impossible not. I wouldn't do it. A Purple Heart's supposed to be for battlefield injuries, not for friendly battlefield injuries. So that was it. I spent 11 months, 22, very interesting. Got to go to Paris for a vacation and went on 2 trips to Germany on business. Took a patient over to Germany and so on. They wanted someone to accompany this injured person. And so they said, you can go take him over there. So that was interesting. So my military career was longer than the guys that stayed in Kansas. They got out in 18 months. I was in Kansas almost 9 months and then 2 years. So I was in 2 years, 9 months, 11 days, and 4 hours.
What did you do when you came home then, Jerry?
What did you think I did? They wanted me back at Service Life. So I went back to Service Life and picked up right where I left off. And I had an office. That's when I got the title, I think, of Vice President, Chief Underwriter, and stuff like that. I worked there for X number of years. The years and the dates slipped my mind exactly, but I did that for a while. And then I went to work for a company that I can't think of it, whatever it was. I did administrative work for someone else. And then I got a call to come down that there was an opening here from a guy named Vern Davidson, who was a ZBT, who lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, and he had a very successful company down here in Kansas City. Overland Park, Kansas. So the word was that he was interested in adding some people, and he'd be glad to put me to work. Part of the reason was that Service Life sold out. They sold out to somebody in Southwest United States. It was a stock company, and they sold out. So that's why I had to find another job. And it ended up because of somebody else you know. It isn't what you know, it's who you know. Just remember that. Everybody listens to me. It isn't what you know, it's who you know. And I knew the right people several times and came down here and went to work for the company that made apparel, corporate identity apparel. That is apparel with company names on it. That was, nothing had existed like that until 1977 or something when we moved down here. And there was a guy named Nat Nast who had a company that made bowling shirts and a factory. And they sewed bowling shirts. And then they got word, Nat Nast did, that the Champion Spark Plug Company wanted some windbreaker type jackets with the corporate logo on them. And he went to his girls that sewed the bowling shirts and said, can you sew a little windbreaker jacket instead of a bowling shirt? They said, sure. And then he got an embroidery machine to put the corporate logo on them. Or I think they sewed a patch on them. They didn't embroider them in those days. They had a patch, Champion Spark Plug Company. And it was a very, very successful thing. And that business just mushroomed unbelievably. Corporate identity apparel. Somebody saw Champion. Let me look at the neck label in there. Nat Nast Company, Bonner Springs, Kansas, which is just a suburb over here. And the Nat Nast Company growed in leaps and bounds and leaps with corporate identity apparel. So I worked with them for many a year. And the company grew and the company grew, and I did okay. I made a living, still making a living.
Was this the job you came down here to take?
Yes, yes. And it was called the Nat Nast Company. Then they changed the name to Swingster Company. And that Swingster Company grew and grew and grew, made jackets and shirts for R.J. Reynolds, for Michelin Tire, for B.F. Goodrich, for all the feed and seed companies. And the reason they were so big with the agricultural stuff and the feed and the seed companies was the jackets were made, and jackets and shirts were made in the United States. All of a sudden, over the next few years, jackets made in China, jackets made here, jackets made there. You know, the Ciba-Geigy Company didn't want to put a farm shirt out there made in China. They want made in the United States. So that's why Swingster did so very well for a while. And then, of course, it got so, they had a factory in Nebraska and a factory in Mississippi. And then the competition got so good that they started having them made overseas too. But I still work part-time for a company that sells that kind of stuff, and I retired from there, from Swingster American Identity, and now work for a company that has a company store at the Yellow Freight Company, the world's largest truck line, and they have a company store and they sell jackets, shirts, caps with company names on them. One company, Yellow Freight. So I've been, ever since 1977, that's what I've been doing with the businesses. But I've never been an owner, never been a manager, general manager. Had some middle management experience and made a living. Got sent 3 girls through college and so on and all that. So I ain't got no complaints because that beautiful wife has stuck with me for 52 years. Now, I haven't talked this long without interruption for years and years, but I do have a few things to say and getting close to closing. My wife, Barbara, they call her Tootsie, some people, Barbara Rothman, has been the best there ever was or ever will be. She's fantabulous, and I love her and always will. And then our three daughters, and the three daughters and their spouses. I love them all. They're wonderful. They're close-knit, comfortable, get together whenever possible. And their grandchildren, the multiple grandchildren, are unbelievable. I could go on for another many minutes telling you of what all they have done, but I think Miss Barbara has done that separately at an earlier date. But I do love all my kids, my wife, my sister, and sons-in-law and grandchildren. And I appreciate having this opportunity to tell everybody hello and stay well and enjoy life.